Great. So, welcome everybody. Today, I have as a guest Marcello Light. I'm sorry about butchering your last name. He is a technology executive, he is a data and artificial intelligence enthusiast, he is an author, a professor, a mentor, a LinkedIn top voice. He's working at Microsoft as one of his activities in the Dallas area in the US. He has on LinkedIn about 11,500 followers, and he is the author of the book that I read some time ago, the Microsoft certified Azure Data Fundamentals, the DP900 certification guide. Welcome. It's great to have you on,
Thank you
Marcelo.
so much to invite me, Jethro. It is a pleasure to be here sharing some of these knowledges.
Great to have you on. And for those of us who don't know you yet, can you take a minute and describe your background and how you ended up writing this book on Azure Data
Sure.
Fundamentals?
My career started as a software engineer um, 18 years ago. So very technical background in deep software roles. I used it to manage some databases at that time. I spent some of my years working with .NET, some legacy language coding like VB6, .NET 2.0, and then I was moving to more modern development studios like Visual Studio, Java, and then over the last years, I've been working more in the architecture side. So, uh, at least 10 years ago, I started working with big data projects, large data warehousing projects. So, since that time, I loved data. The data projects get me, and I started learning a lot about how to organize better data, how to implement data governance, how to make your data valuable for decision makers. And then everything organized for like 7 years ago. I joined to Microsoft in a data and AI specialist position, and I started helping customers with this journey on like to organize data and implementing data processing information. And in 2021, I received the invitation to write this book. The book was part of my like one of the content creation activities that we do, and was great. Was a big journey. I think was 10 months since the beginning to put organize the content to have foundations like a good deeper level, not very deep, but a good level of knowledge on the technical side, but preparing the reader for the certification that is the fundamental certification for Azure data professionals. So covers since database, data analytics, part of AI, part of business intelligence. So a lot of different flavors you can find in this book. So was a pretty good journey.
Yeah, and actually, I used it to prepare for a training, the DP900 training that I gave 3 months ago. It's a really good primer and it really helped me there. So I really enjoyed it. So thanks for writing the book. You also mentioned that you are a
Mhm.
professor. Can you share more about
Yeah.
that?
During the pandemic, I was in my house, like giving some time back from the transfer to the company and to the customers and all these things. So I was looking in how to contribute more with the community, with new professionals. I started mentoring some new professionals, And I started developing my LinkedIn profile. As you mentioned, I have a good community today with professionals there that interact with me all the time. And one of these connections invited me for the first class. That was an MBA course for software architects, software development architect. So it was a complete course with multiple modules, and I was invited for the data part. So I teach data architect on this MBA course. That is a very interesting organization for the course. We record the classes. It's very similar to the book. The foundations, the concepts, some hands-on exercise, and we have the interactive classes that we talk, we discuss the different situations, the use cases, and everything. After the first was like natural to receive other possibilities, other invites. Today I have three different MBA courses that I teach. I love that. So every month I'm meeting new professionals, new people. These guys, I can refer them for our partners, companies that are looking for good professionals, because they have the knowledge, they are learning in a very fresh way all the most advanced technologies that we have access. So that is very good. I love teach, and for sure learning together. It's a good way to keep updated.
That's nice. That's nice. Yesterday, I was at a potential new client, and the CEO said, "We're looking not for long life students. We're looking for long life teachers, because that's the new DNA of a modern company, to find people who actually can teach and love teaching." So I think that's a great skill set. So great to have
Yeah,
you on
very.
them. So let's start with some foundational concepts. You describe a few of them in your book as well. But what is like the difference between, a database, then a data warehouse, then you see data lakes, and now you have the latest, the data lake house? What are those things, and why do
Great.
they matter?
Database is the foundation. Is the way that we created technologies to store information, store data. Since the most simple ways to store data, like files, like spreadsheet, we can consider all these organization of data as a database. After these major like foundations for databases, we have the more advanced systems to manage data, that are the the relational databases. So some examples: SQL Server, Oracle, MySQL, Postgre. All these databases have been uh, uh, being used in the market a lot for multiple applications, and it's amazing, the possibilities there to store, to control your transactions when you are saving data, when you are adjusting any data, editing the information, when you are querying the data, searching for something. So these databases have all capabilities to organize your data, store in a secure way, and make sure that you have all these different operations. We started from there like 30 years, 40 years ago. And then part of the needs from when you have multiple databases storing your application is to understand this data. So if you have three different applications, for example, you need to create a report, you need to create a spreadsheet, something that organizes this data for you to consume this. In the very beginning, was something created manually, but after some projects created the concept of data warehouse that copy that data from the sources. So the databases were data sources copied to a centralized database that is called data warehouse, and this database was responsible to return reports, return information for users to consume. That was great. A lot of years developing these data warehouses. The technologies were evolving very well, but these technologies at that time had a very complex situation on the scalability of their softwares. So the hardware and the software was escalating, but in a very higher cost for all the companies. So the data warehouse become a solution for major companies, not for startups, for small companies. And then some years ago, I'm not putting the years because it's very complex, but some years ago was implemented the open source project that originated the Hadoop implementation and connected to this the big data concept. That is very similar to data warehouse. The goals are probably the same: process thousands of information and generating insights from that, but with a major difference. On the data warehouse, you have all the hardware and software working together in a single machine, or even when you have multiple machines, there are some engineering stuff to connect these machines. And on the big data concept, you have parallel processing since the beginning. Parallel processing, parallel storage. It changed the game. So these open source projects with Hadoop created, like, was the origin for multiple companies today, like Databricks, like all these companies that use the core of the Hadoop to generate your processing power. So with these two scenarios, data warehouse and big data, some years after that, the companies started seeing that, oh, I like this big data. It solves a lot of problems. I have scalability. I have the possibility to process all my data, not just the structured data that is use it to organize on data warehouse, but I have the possibility to process unstructured data, semi-structured data. So all the information that I have, good, but I miss some of the simplicity of the data warehouse. I miss the organization that I could create on a data warehouse to my reports. So what the market did, let's join the best of both. So let's create some solutions that connect the concepts of big data for scalability and process multiple information that we need today with the benefits of the organization on a data warehouse. That was the first step to create the concept that today we call lake house. That is a data lake with the concepts of a data warehouse. So I'm fast forward all these concepts. There are some steps in the middle of that, but today we see companies implementing, like the Databricks. We have Microsoft Fabric. We have Snowflake. All these different organizations, all these different solutions for data analytics, they use the concept of a lake house organization that have the concepts of scalability from big data, but putting some layers of organization that comes from the data warehouse. So that is the concept.
Nice. So Database is the original source where the information is stored, usually in a relational setup, let's say, very transactional. Then we go to a data warehouse where we actually perhaps even change the data structure to support reporting and feed all those reports. And it's more an analytical structure than a transactional structure. Then we move to a data lake where we can, as I say during the trainings, you can dump anything in a data lake, from structured data to files. I mean, images and video files and audio files. You can, just like with a real lake, you can dump bicycles and even dead bodies in the lake. Anything you can drop in a data lake as well. But then the data lake house adds the more structured approach to this data lake.
Yes, the lake house, as I mentioned, I jumped some steps over this story to be short, but the lake house solved some of the challenges from the big data original concept and created this possibility to use the data warehouse models into the data lake. So the first challenge was, as a data lake can store everything, you need to be very organized to put or like layers on this data lake that create a data governance for your data. So the way that you store your data will be very connected to the results that you have for your reporting. On the lake house concept, the origin of this lake house concept was when we created the project Delta Lake, that is compactization method for data. So when an engineer, a pipeline created by engineer, collects information from transactional databases, include this data into the data lake, automatically this data lake stores this information into a virtual table, and it starts generating metadata from that data. So all the transformation, all the process that you have in this data will be recorded on this table as a metadata to keep history on all interactions that you have with this data. So that's why the lake house is a mix between the traditional big data lake that is just an storage for object stores, and to the data warehouse because it has some tables to store this information and make sure you have the governance to have, in the end, rastreability. You have rastreability from your data from the beginning, from your data source, from your databases, to the end, to your reports. What is doing on these data for all these steps, what transformations you have, what is the calculations that you have here in the middle that created your indicators. It makes the data organization to generate insights much easier to manage because you have the name of this that we use on data is lineage. You have the full lineage of your data from the origin to the consumption.
So you actually add indeed a layer of governance, enterprise grade governance to track all the changes, the deltas on this data set from source to consumption in a report, for example. For auditing purposes, everything is logged.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great. That's really nice. Thanks for clearing that up. And by the way, you used the same word as in the book, and I wrote it down. Like, what does this word mean? I couldn't find it. You said restaurability. What is that
Yeah,
concept?
rastreability is the way that you can track. For example, if you have rastreability of a process in your organization, you have the way to track all the steps of this process since the root causes. So some of the process, for example, in the past, when we were creating reports, sometimes the person that was creating reports was not responsible for the databases. Normal. Because we have DBAs here, database managers, we have BI people that is creating reports, but sometimes the report is not working because of something that was created before that. So, how to identify problems in the report in one KPI? Probably the audience here already saw a report that is saying one specific number there. And you, as a business manager, you know, oh, this number is not right. But how to identify where this number is not right? Sometimes the calculation in the end is right, but before the calculation, this number comes from multiple interactions that could potentially be wrong. So that's why it's important to have this tracking. And today, when we see the modern software development, we see too much logs. So all the developers are today implementing telemetry on the applications all the time to have these trackings, to have rastreability. So you can see if your user is entering in an application in the homepage and clicking how many users are clicking in one link and other and other. So this kind of telemetry is great for applications and it's amazing for data as well. So that's why we have this concept of lineage, and the fancy word is rastreability.
Great, learned something new here. Thanks. But then, of course, now that we have these foundational concepts covered, there's also a cornerstone of modern information security, which is data classification. So, what is it and why does it matter?
Sure. There are multiple definitions for data classification, and these definitions can be implemented by different tools. Some of the people during your data strategy put data classification as just a compliance organization. So you need to create policies to use your data. That's legitimate. So it's great to have in your like data governance strategy part of these created for your policies, your compliance rules, your regulation needs. So you can have some tools that controls all these process into your data. There are multiple solutions in the market that connects on your data lake, your data warehouse, or even your lake house, and manage the data for these with these objective. But sometimes we talk about data categorization in another way. We talk more in a way to organize better our data for our business. So, in this concept, to organize better the data for the end users, for our business consumers, we have one architecture concept that is called data mesh. The data mesh was created to solve one problem for big companies, especially for big companies or complex organizations that have multiple business areas that have some connections, but in general, they are very complex on the organization or categorization of your local data. So just connecting with security and categorization. For example, there are departments into a big organization that are legal department, and that information from the legal department have some specific regulations that the information from sales doesn't have. So the data management and data governance became more complex in different departments in a single company. That's why the data mesh is interesting, because the data mesh creates the possibility to not centralize your information all into one data lake or lake house, but instead of that, you create multiple different organizations for these different departments, different can be child companies, but you create some policies and metrics to manage everything together. So it's like it's not a big problem. It's a solution. It's harder to manage because you have split information, but in the concept and all these the way that was created, the concept of data mesh creates this possibility to have a centralized management, giving some guidances for these different types of data with different regulation needs, different policy needs, and all these things. And then you can manage everything. So, in a nutshell, we have multiple different possibilities for data categorization.
Yeah, that's interesting because data classification is now a part of the cybersecurity
Mhm.
basic hygiene. You need to know what type of data do I have, where is it located, and then classify it, tag it, label it, like public data or internal or sensitive or even secret data. But what I'm seeing now more and more is it's not only used for data analytics, but also for something called DLP or data loss
Mhm.
prevention. How do you see that trend of DLP? Is it rising? Is there more need for this? How do you see it?
Yeah, DLP is something that the companies are always carrying off, because we have two different stages on the DLP, right? We have the DLP for the end user information that we have, like, for both scenarios, we have multiple tools, but for the end user, you need to care about what your end user is doing with their data. And not just for to prevent loss, but to prevent this person that to manipulate data that is out of your compliance. So sometimes you need to implement solutions for to protect your organization, to have someone in your team manipulating data that is not allowed. And the DLP, the concept of the tools are to protect these data to not be like deleted, or even to have a risk to have these leaked for a hacker attack or something like this. So this is the end user, and we have multiple protections for this kind of user. But we have the other information that sometimes have much more value, that is stored on the databases, on the data analytics environment, on the lake houses. So that's why on a data governance strategy, we need to care about security in these two layers. What my users are doing in their computers, in their mobile phones, in their tablets, because all access that you have to your data can be a potential point for attacks, or for leaking, or for the major delete points that you cannot control. And in your in like major environments for databases, you need to care about the security there. We have multiple strategies for that, since the access controls for the users. So I have customers, for example, that decides that any database on their environments, uh, will not be just one manager, for example. Anyone have the possibility to delete or to manage a copy, for example, all the database. So they create a layered security access control based on multiple people to approve an operation, for example, from delete or for to give access to other users. From this part, from the databases that are more complex. From the end user perspective, you can create controls similar to this, but for example, there are tools today that monitor the level of access of your users from your data. That is very interesting as well, because sometimes one person is participating into a project and the manager give them access to one specific data set, one specific database for a period of time, but it's stayed more than it was planned. So, how to detect this access and deny, like block this access to prevent this access control to control all your information. So, there are controls. DLP is important, not DLP just for documents that the major of the IT managers like just look, oh, DLP, I will not lost documents. No, DLP for databases, for data warehouse, for lake house is very important as well.
Yeah, so basically, instead of having all the data as just one
Mhm.
same category, you can label them and then apply different policies and different controls on them with different rules behind it. So you get a more granular control of
Exactly.
your data. I
Mhm.
like that. So you already mentioned the concept of a data mesh. I'm currently reading the book from Pact as well, Engineering Data Mesh in Azure Cloud. Just came out, I think, last month. Um, but what is a data mesh and why does it matter from a CTO, CIO
Yes.
perspective?
Good question. Data mesh have been solving a major problem for complex organizations, large organizations, organizations that want to have analytical environments in different locations, because the problem with the traditional architect is that some of the companies have very specific needs from different business areas, or in sometimes companies, different companies, if you have a holding and child account, child companies. So you want to create a data analytics strategy for all the holding, and you need something splitted, not all centralized. So to solve this complexity, to have these multiple environments, the data mesh concept was created, and it covers a lot of rules, a lot of different aspects to manage all these splitted environment. So it started with the concept to have domains. So the different organizations are domains. You can have a domain for your legal department, a domain for your HR, a domain for your sales and marketing organization, a domain that will cover the like corporate information on your processes. And these domains can be federated to share information each other. So I have like I need to create a report. I'm in the sales organization and I need some information from HR to have like the commissions, to calculate information from my sellers and all these things. So what I do on this is to have my domain sales connecting with the domain HR, asking some questions, some queries there that collects the information that I need, retrieve this information, and I process into my sales organization. This the concept is simple, this domain federating and transacting information, but it's tied to complex organizations, big organizations. If you need to, like, if you want to implement data mesh in a very small organization or uh, like medium organization, I don't recommend. The data mesh involves much more management tasks, management needs, because you have multiple environments to manage. And the way that you create the policies needs to be very organized. You are reading a book that implements this on Azure. On Azure, you have Azure policies. For example, you have the Purview, that is the data governance tool. So a lot of different tools that was created for different purposes, but in a data mesh architect, we need to connect to all these tools to manage this splitted environment, to make sure that we are not creating silos. We are not creating something like totally independent. We in a data mesh, as the concept, the name says, it's a mesh. It needs to be all connected, not something that is, oh, I have my analytics for HR, analytics for sales here, and sometimes I connect. No, data mesh is different. I have all interconnections, giving them the same policies, the same concepts for data governance, creating the strategies, and then when sales needs to connect with HR, they have this federation to do.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm hearing different opinions on the data mesh. I know it's pretty recent, like 2019, so 5 years old. And some say it is really a very nice theory, but it's difficult to implement. Others say, no, it's realistic and it's practical. What is your opinion on the practicality of a data
Yeah,
mesh?
this is the concept. It's one more architect. So we need, as data architects or specialists, we need to identify the organization needs. Sometimes I can create a just one centralized data lake with the lakehouse implementation. I can put all my data there. He creating one specific data governance for that, and it works. So that's why I like mention it a lot of times. It's for complex organizations, like more diverse needs for data in different departments, because I will not suggest data mesh for all cases. And but in some of the organizations, for example, I know a global company, multinational company, that have business in like more than 100 different countries around the world. They were created like merging and acquiring companies all the time. So the business growth with acquisitions. And when you acquire a new company, probably this company have a data analytics environment there, and you as a holding needs to incorporate these analytics to your strategy. So you need to have like visibility on the data there is analyzing there. In this kind of scenario, the data mesh is perfect because you have your policies for your holding, all the companies that you're already managing. And when you acquire a new company that have a different stack there, and one beauty of data mesh is that you don't need to have all the environments with the same tool, with the same tool set. So you can have a data mesh with different technologies, but you need to have technologies that can connect each other on your policies, on your data governance strategy. So this should be much easier for this holding that's acquiring a new company to analyze the environment. Okay, this environment based on these technologies that you have here, I can create as a new domain, and then we will start federating here to serve our major analytics environment and generate insights from that. So there are scenarios that data mesh is very, very valuable.
Got it. Got it. That's a nice explanation. So let's move into the topic of data
Mhm.
security. As we know that obviously data is crucial. It's the holy grail that attackers go for, either to ransomware it or to steal it and leak it. So how does moving to a cloud-based data platform impact security?
Yes. The impact of the world of cloud on the data analytics, it's not something totally different, uh, but it requires us to have a deeper knowledge on the way that we use the data. I mentioned earlier that we always need to see the data as our analytical and databases in one side and the end users in the other side, and create a strategy that covers these two different layers. When we are moving our environment to the cloud, we need to take care about the same concepts of security that we have on our data center on premises. For example, how will be my access control to the servers? How will be my border control, like firewall? How I want to implement a threat protection, threats detection automatically in my environment. So the security controls that I have for my data on premises needs to stay the same in the cloud. The unique point of the difference in the cloud is that you need to care more about the endpoints. So when you have an environment on premises, you can block all your environment to access internet. To be honest, over the years, I saw some companies that realized that they were trying to block all the internet access, but in the end user, they were giving them access to the internet, and the end user was copying data and sharing data with the internet. So there are multiple layers to manage it on these stages. On your servers, data analytics environments, it's easier. You need to create controls and define the endpoints to access this information in a very cared way. So, in a production environment, you need to be aware about all these different pieces. The first layer, the firewall, the access control, multi-factor authentication for your credentials, for your admin credentials, all these controls that you can put, DLP, security threat protection. So controls that you have on your servers, your main information. From your end user side, it's more complex, I think, because sometimes you don't control exactly this person. So you need to identify tools that will create your governance on the data categorization, as you mentioned, to layer your data properly, to identify when a person is exporting data from a report or exporting data from a database access that they had, and how these data in the endpoint in the computer of this user is have been managed, because the regulations that we have, GDPR and other similar regulations, doesn't like exclude the end user data. So the company have responsibility with the corporate databases and the end user data as well. So that's why we need to create our strategy thinking about the two users of this data, our internal systems, our managers, and the end user. The cloud doesn't change nothing on that. Just put one more aware about the endpoint because you always have the possibility to open for the internet.
And then I always ask myself the question, let's say that you are an end user and you have access to a sensitive report with secret data, let's say, and there are controls in place to not be able to export, to copy, to print, to download. Okay. But what stops me from taking my smartphone, taking a photo of that sensitive report, and I still have the data? What type of control can we employ to discourage that?
Yeah, that's hard. It's not something that the current tool set that we have is totally safe, especially with multiple equipments like this. You can pick your phone and took a picture, right? That's why we need to care about the security layers on our data. If this person cannot see the data as the possibility for them to take a picture, we need to ask this person should be seeing this data or not. So if the information is sensitive in a way that this user could not be sharing or even manipulating this data, it's better for them to not have access to that data. In some companies that I use it to work and some students from my classes that ask similar questions, what we usually see is create internal guidances, internal compliance documents that covers the data usage responsibility. So with your managers, with your business users that will manipulate sensitive data, you have an agreement that was signed. This is in a legal organization. I don't know if these kind of contracts have a legal power, but the thing is, it's a trust, right? You create a trust on this user that I'm giving you access to this sensitive data. It's very important for our company. It's like a private project or something like this. But we have here the guidances that you have very clear on the data manipulation. So please follow these guidances and sign. That's a way, because
Mhm.
with technology today, we have multiple controls. But when we talk about the possibility for a person to pick up a phone that is not managed by the organization, for example, and took a picture, that is very hard to manage, right?
That's, I agree. I think the best control that I've seen so far, next to the policies to have a legal base, I think the watermarking with the name of the user throughout the report. So even if he takes a picture, his name or his ID is visible. Now, of course, that can be countered with AI, which then does post production, say remove the watermark, and it can try. So you'll never get 100% security there, but I think as a information security officer, watermarking is a must do for these
Yep.
sensitive reports.
Perfect.
Which moves to the one but last topic about KQL, the Kusto query language. I'm seeing it popping up all over the place. It's very popular also in cybersecurity to analyze log files. So what is it? Because I know SQL. This is KQL. So what is it and what's so special
Perfect.
about it?
Yeah, it's a variation from the language. When we talk about SQL, we have the structured query language. QQL is the Kusto query language. It's another type of query language based on optimized for time series data. So QuickQL is very well used to organize logs, for example, organize telemetry, information that you have in a streaming from your application, or even logs from an advanced threat protection system or a CN, something that is monitoring your information, and you have like tons of telemetry on that, logs that you need to query. The QuickQL can be a much better language when you are creating these queries than the traditional SQL. What we have been seeing is that much more in the market, the near real time processing have been needed. I saw in the past some companies trying to create data analytics 100% near real time, like all event processing analytics, and it's very hard because the data is ingesting into databases. This is the structured data. You have logs that have been collecting by security applications or even from your applications on the telemetry side. They are creating logs. So you have multiple different data sources that creates all this information. When you are processing these, the QQL can help on the real-time analysis. Or if you don't need real time, that's okay. You can create QQL just for past information as well, just to aggregate a large amount of logs, for example, to identify an information, an anomaly for your troubleshooting, for your like create some security policies, additional policies, or something like this. So this is a technology, not a technology, it's a language that have been implemented by multiple technologies that helps you to find good information into a large amount of time series data.
And another thing that I'm seeing as a trend is SaaS solutions that kind of combine all the different steps to analyze and visualize data, from ingestion to transformation to loading it, etc. On the Microsoft system, it's a Fabric, which is now I think it was just released in November last year, or as a public preview. So what are some trends that you're seeing with the SaaSification of the data platforms?
Yeah, if I return to my first explanation about the foundations of databases, data warehouse, big data, one of the challenges with all this journey was the different solutions to solve different challenges, different needs on the companies. So in general, a traditional big organization have 10, 15, 20 different tools to support all the data strategy. And it's very hard to manage. One of the major problems with that is the integration between the tools. For example, we see some organizations that decided to use Talent, for example, or Informatica for the integrations, for the ETL process, and all these things. And then for the lake house, could be the data lake, could be Cloudera, or even processing the information with a Teradata, data warehouse. So there are multiple tools, and then to manage everything is a very hard task. So one of the things that we most listen from CDOs around the world is, I don't want to be the chief integration officer. I want to be the chief data officer. I want to work on my data to generate insights, to generate value from a business. So that's why the software companies are trying to create more simplicity on a data analytics environments. And it comes to SaaS because if we see the cloud offers IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. SaaS is the best one for all business because you don't manage nothing. You just use the software. And to have a SaaS solution that covers all the different aspects of a data analytics strategy is something very, very interesting. So today we need to cover integration. So all data analytics needs to have a very strong integration capability to connecting multiple data sources to process the information in batch loads or real time. We need to have a good storage that covers these open source models like the lakehouse concept with delta tables. We need to have the traditional Spark processing that comes from the Hadoop, from the big data implementations that today is very used for data scientists, data engineers to have coding, to have process based on Spark processing that can be written in Python, R, all these different languages. We need to have a SQL organization. That is the concept of the lake house, for example. This SQL, sometimes the name is SQL endpoint, is the way to access a lake house with traditional SQL queries. So you can create a procedure like using SQL and query your lake house. So an end-to-end solution needs to cover all these aspects: integration, storage, big data processing, SQL processing, and some additional solutions for data governance, something that will organize all these things. So I think today we have some good solutions. As you mentioned on Microsoft Fabric, it was launched in November. Actually, in general availability, the preview was before that. And the first experiences that we have been seeing in the market is pretty good because it creates simplicity. You don't need to manage clusters. You don't need to manage the security layers that we talked a lot during this session. All these different nuances that we have on data analytics, it's more simple when you have a SaaS solution.
Great. Thanks for that answer and clarification. So that leads me to the last question of the future. So what is the future on data in general moving forward? We got cloud AI, all of that. IoT is boosting as well. And what's the future for you, Marcelo?
Sure. I think the major future for analytics in general is to have, for data in general, is to serve AI. Like this over this last year, we saw AI emerging as never before, and I have just one number here that is interesting. In just 18 months, over 1 billion people utilized large language models when ChatGPT was launched. So it's 1/7 of the total population of the world. So it's amazing what we are doing with AI today, but especially with the new large language models and the small language models as well. So the combination of the generative AI and all the possibilities that we have with these tools, the data foundations start becoming the fundamental for all companies. So we cannot have the major of the AI in our process, helping our business leaders, helping our operational tasks or automating some operational tasks if our data is not organized, if our data is not governed, safe, and all these things. So what we have been doing with data over the years needs to be implemented, needs to be more mature, because all our AI initiatives that will be accelerating over the next years needs to have this right this fundamental part on the data. So one of the things that I saw in my customers, for example, was in the over the last years they hired data scientists and they started building their own machine learning models based on the data, like an extension of the data engineering tasks, building these data scientist organizations with machine learning development and all these things. But with the launching of these pre-built models, with these large language models, sometimes we don't need all these work, all these efforts. We just need to organize our data, pick the right information from this, fine tune a pre-built model like a GPT, Llama, all these new capabilities that we have. AWS just launched their large language model, Google with Gemini. So we have multiple offers, but we need our data very organized to send to these large language models to process your data and then generate the automations for your business. That's the what I'm seeing for the next years, and probably the next decade will be the most productive decade in ever for the humanity life, because we will never saw thousands of different innovations and process automations, all these things that today is a possibility with AI.
So data management and data governance will continue to rise in importance next to data security. So a lot of work ahead of us. So that brings me to your personal future. Like, are you going to do a second edition of the DP900 book, or other books upcoming, or courses you want to teach?
Yeah, we have been talking about a possible second edition after the Fabric launch for sure, because the book, the data analytics part on the book, we cover more on the Synapse and the solutions on Azure. But Package launched a book for Fabric that is a very good complement for professionals that like started with my fundamental book and look for to be deeper on data analytics. So I don't know. I think the from the book side, probably that is a good starting point for all professionals that wants to onboard on the data careers. So databases, data analytics, AI. So fundamental for all professionals. And yeah, if we create a second edition, probably I will organize the content to have more this focus, to have the foundation for all Azure data professionals, independent on the area that you will be specialized. I think this is a good contribution, especially for my students, my new professionals, and then they can look for a book like yours, the book from other authors that have deeper knowledge in specific technologies, right?
Great, great. I really hope a second edition comes out. I really enjoyed the first one, but now the DP900 indeed does cover Fabric as a mandatory part of the exam. So I'm really looking forward for a second edition. So hope you can work that out with Pact. It would be great. Marcelo, thank you very much for joining on this episode. Very insightful. Thank you very much. I wish you all the best, and who knows, we see each other again
For
in the
sure.
future.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Blue Dragon Podcast, a podcast dedicated to IT decision makers and helping them gain perspective of what's going on in cloud, AI, and security. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a thumbs up, like and subscribe to the channel so you'll be up to date all the time when new episodes come out. Your support really means a lot to me. Thank you very much. Have a great day and see you next time.